Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Jummah Mubarak. Welcome to today's Friday Reflections on this Friday, the 18th of June, 2021. I hope everybody is well, wherever you're tuning into this from, and having, if you're in the UK, a good evening. Apologies that this is much later than the usual time that I would, well, I don't fix the time on a Friday, but I usually have done this Friday Reflections before now, so apologies for doing it so late. But I have had a very busy day, and this is the first chance that I've had to sit down and do this. So that's that's why it's happening now. It's not a glitch with the computer, but never mind. Today, I would like to read from this wonderful little book that I have, which is one of the collections of Mawlana Shaykh Nazim's sohbets. And I'm going to read from page 28 in this book, which is titled In the Mystic Footsteps of Saints by Mawlana Shaykh Nazim. And the sohbet is titled Allah's Dye, as in dye, not like death, but D-Y-E, colouring, essence and attributes. So this is a recording in text of one of Mawlana Shaykh Nazim's talks. And it starts with a question of the theories of Sigmund Freud. Many have by now been disproven and discarded. But through my experience as a psychiatrist, I have come to believe that at least one basic theory is true, that based upon our experience as a child and based upon our connection to our parents, we internalize these experiences and later tend to see everything in the world in that perspective. For example, if a child has been beaten excessively by his father, he grows up seeing everything around him as potentially dangerous. So he is always living in fear that people may strike him as his father did. On the other hand, someone who had an overindulgent, loving mother may be predisposed to seeing the world at large as loving and indulgent, and therefore have problems facing up to the realities of adulthood. I have confirmed these theories in my own work, and as so far as I can tell, they bear out in reality on the psychological, not necessarily the spiritual level. So this is a question that a psychiatrist asked Mawlana Shaykh Nazim. Shaykh Nazim responds and says, while it is true that the effects of one's childhood environment may leave their imprint on the adult personality, the inborn personality is stronger still. A rose may be planted in London or in Cyprus, and it may grow in either place. If it grows in London, it will, as a result of the cold and wet climate, remain fresh over a long period of time, but it will not be fragrant. If it grows in Cyprus, on the other hand, because of the hot and dry climate, it will only remain fresh for a short period of time, but it will be very fragrant while it lasts. Whatever the characteristics of its life, a rose is a rose in London or in Cyprus, and will never be a jasmine or a lilac. The point is that the Creator has given each person a unique and distinct personality. Even identical twins may have unmistakably different personalities. So I am not referring to hereditary as identical twins are genetically identical. I am not promoting the effects of heredity over those of environment, but am referring to another factor, a spiritual one, beyond the scope of psychological debate. Our Grand Sheikh explained that each personality is an emanation of a divine name, a unique attribute of God, and that there are as many divine attributes as there are human beings, and more endlessly. Therefore, on the purest spiritual level, each and every individual is a unique manifestation of God. In the Quranic rendering of the story of the Last Supper, the 12 apostles asked Jesus, "Is your Lord able to cause a supper to descend to us from heaven?" Notice they did not ask if our Lord or the Lord could cause the manifestation of this miracle, but whether your Lord. Don't let this wording lead you to believe that the apostles were skeptics regarding the existence of God, and therefore said your Lord rather than our Lord or the Lord. No, their belief is in the essence of God was unmistakable, unshakable. They said your Lord because the performance of this miracle was directly related to the attributes of God manifest in and through Jesus Christ, the attributes that enabled him to manifest so many miracles. In the same way that the divine manifested through Jesus in just that way, so does the divine manifest through each and every personality. That is the essence of each soul. And it is not subject to change. But just as the beauty of a diamond may be enhanced by a beautiful gold wing, or be hidden by wrapping it in cotton, so do external influences determine to what extent that divine personality is able to shine forth. So here, a psychiatrist doesn't give the name of the psychiatrist, but the psychiatrist asked Mawlana Shaykh Nazim a question. And Mawlana Shaykh Nazim doesn't deny the points that the psychiatrist makes. The things that happen during childhood will leave an imprint upon the adult and have some effect. But Mawlana Shaykh Nazim says beyond that, there is still a unique personality within each and every one of us. And this is reflecting a divine attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah has put within each and every heart. So this means that even though there will be some effect from how a child is brought up and how they will be as an adult, it doesn't mean that that's the only thing happening, that each person will still be a unique personality. And it doesn't mean that just because a child had a good or a bad childhood, that they will not become an amazing human being as an adult. It doesn't mean that that will not happen. It's as Mawlana says, if a rose is planted in London or in Cyprus, it will still flower. So a rose is still a rose. And in the same way, if a human being is given a particular attribute by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will still manifest that, whether they had a good or a bad childhood. It will obviously leave some effect, but it will not be the only thing in operation. The psychiatrist asked another question. Psychoanalysis claims that problems stem from personality, but you are saying that the personality is beyond those influences and that only some superficial conditioning causes behavioral abnormalities. And Mawlana Shaykh Nazim responds and says, the divinely ordained personality is always sound and intact. But as for example, a consistently strong wind may cause a tree to grow crooked, so one's environment can affect one's development. We must draw a distinction between essence and attribute. There is an essence to everything. You are tall, for example, but without a body, tall is a meaningless adjective. Similarly, good and bad manifestations are impossible without a person to manifest them. It is only the adjectives that are influenced by the atmosphere. 100 years ago, there was a religiously observant atmosphere in this country. Now there is an atheist atmosphere, and the manifestations of this atmosphere can only be altered with the greatest difficulty. So Mawlana is saying that the essence of a person doesn't change. Oh, sorry. The name of the book is In the Mystic Footsteps of Saints. It's one of Mawlana Shaykh Nazim's books, a collection of his sohbets. This one was published in 2002, and it's still available. You can still order this from Amazon. So Mawlana Shaykh Nazim is saying the essence of a person remains the same. But just like if a tree is growing in a very strong wind, it may cause the tree to grow at an angle, to grow crooked, but it's still a tree. So the environment will obviously have some effect, but it is not the only effect. Whereas in psychoanalysis, they put a lot more emphasis upon the environment and try and explain everything through that. But this is because they are looking at things from a purely psychological perspective rather than a spiritual perspective. And Mawlana Shaykh Nazim already said during this sohbet that there is when you look at things from a spiritual perspective, that this explains some of the things which the psychology itself can't fully explain. So it goes beyond. Just like certain things couldn't be explained through purely materialistic science without psychology. That has explained things that previously medical science couldn't explain. I mean, when Freud and Jung first started publishing books and information about psychology, they were actually questioned. Even some people thought they were crazy, within medical science, within other areas of medical science. So, but over time, at least some of what they discovered has borne out and proven to be true. The psychiatrist asks another question. For example, a man may be raised in a quarrelsome surrounding, and thus he grows up fearful. You may encourage him to leave the situation he is in, but by now he has internalized his quarrelsomeness and carries it with him. What can be done to help such a person? Mawlana Shaykh Nazim says, it is for this reason that children must be brought up properly, in a way that imparts good characteristics to them. Of course, this is only possible if we possess those good characteristics ourselves. According to the Holy Prophet, newborn babies are all born in perfect harmony with their Lord's will. It is only the parents who influence them to oppose his will. Despite this, the essence is ever the same manifestation of divine perfection, like indelible ink that can be covered but never removed. In this end, all of those coats of cheap paint will flake off, and there will remain only the original unfaded color. This is what is referred to in the Quran as Allah's dye. You may use your position as a psychiatrist in order to apply paint remover. You are obliged, however, to quickly apply another layer, but a more acceptable one. Unfortunately, most psychiatrists have no paint remover at all, and they're only applying the new coat over the old one. Thus, they estrange their patients even more from that original divine code, so that in the end there is even more to remove. Interesting. So here Mawlana is clearly referring to the conditioning from parents or from society that a child and a person receives. And he's saying that when they visit most psychiatrists, that the psychiatrist actually, many psychiatrists will probably only apply new conditioning to the person to make their behavior within acceptable norms. But it's not really removing all of the, the toxicity that's already within the person and all the bad conditioning that's still there. It's like painting over, something that's old paint, and without cleaning it completely, and then repainting it with a fresh coat. This is the model Mawlana is using to try to explain why it's just, this type of approach doesn't work. Implying that anyway. Mawlana was then asked another question by the psychiatrist. What method can I apply as a paint remover? If I mention to people anything, even remotely related to religion, they will get angry and stop listening. Mawlana Shaykh Nazim says, you must locate the open door. People have an allergy against religion, so don't mention it. We have 99 methods to be utilized in the treatment of disturbed people. So when you have incorporated enough of this teaching, you will receive inspiration that will guide you to the application of suitable methods. In the meantime, you must keep a journal in which you record the details of your patients' afflictions and analyze their personalities. The psychiatrist asks, now I'm going to be a little more difficult. One notices many personality disorders among your disciples, myself included. We needn't talk only of mental patients. Despite the practices we follow and the conscious attempts we make to improve ourselves, the character disorders seem to persist. I am not saying there is no improvement or progress, but it can be observed that many of the problems are still there, even in some cases after many years. Mawlana Shaykh Nazim said, no psychiatrist can ever encounter as much resistance to the treatment he is giving his patients as we encounter in our training of Sufi aspirants. The ego is allergic to paint remover. That is why you, in your position, can only hope to remove a particularly unsatisfactory layer and quickly replace it with another. My job is one that encounters serious and terrible resistance from the ego, as I am trying to remove all of the paint and lay bare the original dye of Allah, which pertains to the divine essence, the original spiritual personality. But the ego wants only that its layers of paint are never removed. Even when people come to see a Sufi sheikh, their egos are hoping to obtain more adornments. But it is our duty to take everything from the hands of the ego, not to adorn it further, to undermine its possessiveness and dissipate acquired characteristics in favor of original ones. Therefore, when people first come, I try to give them something, but when I leave, I collect it from them. If I were to say this to you at first, and immediately set to removing the layers of ego, quickly you would all escape from my hands, and I would finally be able to retire. To move a mountain is an easier task than removing one of the acquired characteristics of our egos. Our egos are but vehicles to make possible for our souls to exist in this realm. But the ego puts forward claims to being the man and not just the horse. Our job is to make this all clear and to help people get their horses under control. If this task were easy, all religious scholars would be sheikhs and all sheikhs would be grand masters. But the ego is so difficult to tackle that we can never find such facility in reaching high stations. Quite to the contrary. We find most aspirants bogged down at their present levels and sinking. As for psychiatrists, only a few of them understand the nature of personality and how to go about changing it. Most of them add only more to the already heavy burdens of their customers. This you know better than I. They cannot affect the soul with their methods. At best, they can train the horse to behave a little more obediently. In order to affect the rider of the horse, there must be a murshid, a master or guide at work. A real murshid must know what to do for his patients, or else he is not a guide. If a doctor doesn't know how to treat his patient's illnesses, he is useless. He may have read so many medical books, but if he doesn't know what to do when a sick person comes to him, he is useless. SubhanAllah, a lot to take in there. It's an interesting conversation between a psychiatrist and a sheikh, because there is some degree of crossover and some degree of mutual understanding. But the sheikh goes much further than the psychiatrist, because the psychiatrist is only looking to correct personality disorders or to help, even if they can't completely overcome them, but to help the patients get through it when they have these sort of difficulties. But the sheikh goes beyond that, because the sheikh is working to heal the soul of the person. And in order to do that, the ego has to be tamed. Ideally, we would tame our own egos, but there would be no need for sheikhs if people were able to tame their own egos. And Mawlana compares this to even moving mountains is easier than taming the ego. And so to the psychiatrist's question of why there are still some like personality disorders and mental conditions amongst some of the Sheikh's disciples, Mawlana Sheikh Nazim is saying that there is no more difficult task than the one that he has been given, which is to tame the egos of these people. And there is no more resistance than there is from the ego. Whereas the psychiatrist is not seeking to tame the ego of the person, but simply to correct some personality disorders so that people can either get on with their lives or their behavior would be more acceptable. So the psychiatrist and the sheikh, there's some mutual understanding of something, but at the same time, it's an interesting discussion because it brings out the fact that the Shaykh has to do a lot more than what the psychiatrist does. And even though people may go to the Shaykh seeking to be guided and supported, but the reality is that many people go to their Shaykhs looking for miracles or looking for some kind of spiritual powers or something like this. And they're completely missing the point of it, because it is about correcting our own understanding of things, our own perception of things, and to be able to see reality as reality truly is, rather than through the mismatch of different illusions and delusions that most people see on some level or another. The psychiatrist asks another question. He says, you say that every person is guided by one attribute of Allah. If a person learns this attribute, does it serve as a guideline for him in his quest to reach his goal? Mawlana Shaykh Nazim says yes, and it is important to know it, but it is a difficult burden of knowledge to carry now. It is of utmost importance that you first arrive to the point of controlling your horses, or you may attack people with the power you have gained. Who in their right mind would grant me permission to drive a truck or a bus? I would only leave a trail of wreckage in my wake. I can't even control a small car, so what about these huge vehicles? Therefore, a murshid will never impart any glimpse of the realities of the individual divine names without having first established that an aspirant is in control of his horse. Of course, if a person isn't in control of themselves, then if they are granted more powers and abilities, then they will only be a danger to those around them. The psychiatrist asks, what happens if a person dies without these layers of ego having been removed? Shaykh Nazim said the original die must still appear. That person may appear to you to be under the influence of illusion, but at the time of death, Allah is pursuing his claims on his servants. And though Satan may fight for him, Allah is always victorious. He says, O Satan, even though this person may have followed you in his actions, the essence which I granted him has been preserved intact. These are the secrets of destiny, and no one can speak of them. The psychiatrist asks, what about people who refuse to accept a guide? Shaykh Nazim said their horses are very strong and wild. If you approach them from the front, they will bite you, but if from the back, they will kick. Question. When I organize seminars for people, I realize that they have a great deal of resistance to this kind of approach to fighting the ego. Rather, they want to have access to miraculous powers and insights, to travel astrally, to read people's minds, and they want to gain these powers by any means, except fighting the ego. Mawlana Shaykh Nazim said everyone wants to become a doctor or engineer without the trouble of going to a university and struggling through the long and arduous studies. They all want to buy instant diplomas, but what validity do they have? If I were to go to your country and claim that I was an expert on anything, even psychiatry, they would say to me, where are you coming from? The moon? Yes, people are foolish. They want to achieve everything without effort. to take everything without stretching out their hands. It is not easy to receive spiritual authority. And this is the last question the psychiatrist asked. Allah Almighty has granted distinctions between people. Do these apparent distinctions relate only to the attributes of their egos, or also to their spiritual essences? Mawlana Shaykh Nazim said, just as there are endless stars in the sky, each having distinct characteristics, so do people's inner realities differ. If the inner realities of even one person were to be completely unveiled, the stars and the whole universe would vanish. So don't think that we are just caricatures. The essential reality of each soul is an unchanging reality in the divine presence. But Allah Almighty has created so many different kinds of people to benefit each other through their interaction, to mutually reveal divine attributes. We can say that for as many of the children of Adam as appear in existence, there are as many divine attributes. But that is only an approximation, for the reality cannot be explained through words nor to the mind. Until we are able to rise above the level of the mind, people themselves serve as the means of attaining a state of preparedness for spiritual life, and our various conflicts and scrapes serve as means of polishing the heart. Once in the market of Damascus, I observed a blacksmith polishing some chains. How did he do it? The middle part of the chain was wrapped in a skin, while 4, 6, and 8 people pulled each end back and forth. Through this scraping together of the chains, the chains were polished. We must be open to the wisdom around us. SubhanAllah. SubhanAllah. This is also true as well. The person who is on the path is open to seeing Allah's signs everywhere. They don't need even to open the Quran in order to see Allah's signs, because there is also the book of creation, which is in essence everything that manifests in our world. It has secrets and wisdom that we can learn from that if we keep our eyes open and we are observant. Here Mawlana Shaykh Nazim is observing how the blacksmith's chains, as they rubbed together with the pieces of skin between them, they polished each other. And the insight that he get from this is that as people rub against each other with our different personalities, sometimes we rub each other up the wrong way, sometimes we annoy each other. But through all of this process, through all these different interactions, that we actually polish ourselves as human beings. And we become, or we're given the opportunity at least to become better human beings through how we respond to these interactions. There are lessons within all of them. Mawlana is saying just like this, there is so many things that we can learn through being observant to the signs of Allah, which are all around us. Now it is getting late, and before we finish Maghrib time here, I'm going to read my Maghrib. It's slightly late, but it's still within the time window. And hopefully next week, my Friday reflections will not be this late. And I look forward to seeing you all next Thursday for my weekly zikr and sohbet, and next Friday. If you're in the UK, I wish you a very good evening. And if you're joining me from elsewhere around the world, may you have a good and blessed day, whichever time of the day it is for you. And I wish you all Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.